I posted a video yesterday right here, the 10 most crushing, excruciating postseason losses for Ohio State going back to 1980. Folks, check it out if you want to be in misery for 15 minutes or so. Steve, this ranks high on the list. This one is tough to take.
Well, yeah, and I think it's up there for a lot of reasons, but probably the biggest is that this was definitely a winnable game. I mean, they're up 14 points going to the fourth quarter, and kind of symmetrous to Ohio State played North Carolina in basketball here a couple of weeks ago and took a 2-point lead with 2 seconds left. That's a game you need to win 100 out of 100 times when the other team's got to go the length of the court to score to force overtime, which North Carolina did, and then North Carolina won in overtime. So very symmetrical to that. Also symmetrical to the Clemson loss in the 2019 season, the Fiesta Bowl out in Arizona, where Ohio State threw the interception, Fields threw the interception in the end zone very late in the game, and Trevor Lawrence and Clemson pulled out the win. I think 29-23 was the final score there. And very similar, had Ohio State scored and kicked the extra point and won that game 30-29. It's kind of the way that this went with Georgia. The Buckeyes had that late lead and gave it up with a touchdown in the final minute. And then obviously down a point, C.J. Stroud drove Ohio State into position, but not quite close enough. And people will pin this on Noah Ruggles. That's very misguided. I think the issue, for Ohio State, as we'll go through, is just the defense just quite simply wasn't a national championship caliber defense. And again, a lot of the same problems that they had in the loss to Michigan. Back-to-back games, giving up 40 points again to end the season, just as it was last year against Michigan and Utah. And just the second time in 133 years of Ohio State football where the Buckeyes scored 35 points or more and lost a game. The other one was the Orange Bowl to Clemson, 40-35 back in 2013. So only twice in the entire history of Ohio State football have the Buckeyes scored 35 or more points and lost a game, and this was one of them. So any way you want to cut it, is it their most painful or most difficult loss ever? You may, in the postseason, when you frame it like that, yes, there were a lot of Michigan losses down through the years back in the 90s that were devastating, cost them a shot at the national championship. This certainly cost them a shot at the national championship, no doubt. 98 Michigan State is up there. I'd say that Clemson loss re-referenced would be up there. Michigan State 2015. So any number of tough losses, and you're kind of left. Did they miss a window here? You had two of the best quarterbacks you're ever going to have wearing Ohio State uniform with Justin Fields and C.J. Stroud, and you didn't win a national championship with them. And very unfortunate circumstances. Only one win over Michigan in their 4 years as well, although the 2020 game wasn't played. But it was a lot of missed opportunity, no doubt.
Yeah, you look at this game, and I think one of the big issues too, when I look at it, is there are a lot of people going into this game who are like, God, I hope Ohio State doesn't get embarrassed. I hope Ohio State doesn't get run out of the building. Ohio State opens up this leads for much of the game, and now we're sitting here looking at it as the one that got away when, truthfully speaking, 3 hours prior to everything going awry, I think fans were just hoping that Ohio State would show up and not lay an egg. And in the fourth quarter, things happened, and we can get into whether or not it was targeting on Marvin Harrison Jr. or not. There were a lot of breaks. Was it truly a fourth down when that was called short on the field, and then they go up to the booth, and it appears that he got it, but it's one thing that can't be denied is that UGA came out and played its you-know-what off in the fourth quarter and really took it to the Buckeyes there. A lot of Ohio State's issues came back to light in that fourth quarter, things that we hadn't necessarily seen through the first three quarters. And no, the defense didn't play its best game by any stretch of the imagination. But there were large stretches of the game where the defense was playing well, but then it felt as if Ohio State kind of went back to some of its old tendencies. The defense got way too aggressive. Guys got stuck out in difficult positions. And I'm going to call a truth. Guys fell down, and there were mistakes along the way. So it certainly is one that is difficult to swallow, and I think it's compounded by the fact that Michigan lost, and everybody looks at TCU as, oh, well, Ohio State would have gone on to the next game, and this would have been Oregon to Alabama. And while the team was talented, that this would have been resulted in a national championship and a ring and everything else. And, that's something that'll be fun to speculate. And, I may even go through and do a mock simulation type thing of what Ohio State TCU would look like. That will either get 10 million viewers or 2. I'm not exactly sure where Ohio State's fan base would be on that act of fan fiction. But, certainly a difficult game. But I think I walked away from Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and I don't wear any sort of hat other than just I'm neutral and I'm there to cover the game. But I took off that hat for a minute. I was like, I think that this team came out and really accomplished a lot. It didn't finish the job, but it certainly was a better effort for 48 minutes than I think about anybody could have predicted. And I was somebody who actually picked Ohio State to win.
Ryan Dawes, appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for your support, sir. Morning. You gentlemen have given great perspectives on the loss to Georgia. I am looking forward to next season. I mean, at least we are not USC. Yeah, we could do a separate episode on USC's collapse in the final 4 minutes against Tulane. Not against Georgia, against Tulane, and all due respect there. Come on. All right. So, Kevin, we'll stay with you because in a game like this, as Steve pointed out, similar to the Clemson game of 2019, the loss by 6 points, when the game's this excruciating, there are those landmark plays, calls, incidents. So Marvin Harrison targeting, also having to leave the game. So the targeting call affects the scoring opportunity. The Harrison loss is enormous, of course. The Kirby Smart timeout call that negated the fake punt successfully at midfield with an 11-point lead with about 10 minutes left. Correct me on the timing if something in that range. Of course, the Brock Bowers 4th down conversion, it seemed to be the correct reversal. However, and there's always those. So there's a difference between crud, that was a bad break, but they got it right. Justice was served versus, hey, we got ripped off. Where do you weigh those key moments?
Well, obviously the Marvin Harrison was the most gigantic of everything. I mean, not only losing Marvin Harrison Jr. for the remainder of the game, but then Ohio State had to settle for a field goal to make a 2-score lead into a 2-score lead versus maybe potentially getting a new set of downs and being able to make a 2-score lead into a 3-score lead. And that's not to say that Georgia didn't come out like a house on fire, but now they're going to have to do it an extra time. And while Ohio State's offense still would have been without Marvin Harrison Jr., there's a lot to be said about having to come back from 3 scores versus 2 scores in that amount of time. It's not like this happened in the second quarter. This happened with a minute left in the third. So we're talking about 16 minutes of game time left. I like Ohio State's chances there. I mean, obviously we could play the what if game and say, what if Marvin Harrison Jr. did not get hit like that? Well, there's not a doubt in my mind that Ohio State wins that game if Marvin Harrison Jr. remains in the game the way that the offense was chugging. Ohio State may have needed to score on every possession, but Ohio State absolutely could have scored on every possession moving forward in that game. So, and this isn't to take away anything from Emeka Egbuka, who ends up being the leading receiver in the game. This doesn't take away stuff from Xavier Johnson, from Julian Fleming, but you can't take the best player off the field when you already have Jackson Smith and Jigba, who has been shut down for the season, when you already are without Trevion Henderson, and largely by that point of the game, Mayan Williams. It's just player after player after player. And that's not to say that Georgia didn't have its issues. Darnell Washington's lost for the game. They lose 2 outside linebackers during the course of the game. There's a lot of things going on there, but you mentioned the fake punt, and it's come out since that Ohio State apparently had 12 guys on the field. So, maybe Ohio State could have been the beneficiary of a break in that game, and that doesn't get called. And I don't think you can go to the booth after the fact to count that up. I don't know. Replay is such a collection of willy-nilly loose rules that are poorly interpreted to begin with, that I don't trust anything that comes in out of what's replayable and what's not replayable. I'm very careful in all of this because I don't want it to be a case of saying that Ohio State got screwed in this game. No, Brett screwed Brett. In terms of the Montreal screw job, Ohio State screwed Ohio State by not being able to get a couple more yards to set up something a little bit inside of a 50-yard field goal. Ohio State screwed up when a defender falls down on a one-play drive, and when time is Ohio State's ally, and you have 6 minutes to try and slow down Georgia. Just slow Georgia down, for Pete's sake, and it's a one-play drive. Ohio State screwed Ohio State, but it certainly feels like Ohio State was born under a bad sign for 2022, because I think if we look at the giant cosmic flip a coin game, Ohio State ended up on the short end more times than it ended up on the right side.
Yeah, those were all good points and a great wrestling reference there, obviously, to the Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels Survivor Series from 1997. So this was an epic game and 2 great teams, no question about it. And they basically played to a complete standoff. And as it turned out, Georgia, the final analysis, had 1 more point than Ohio State did. Ohio State's just as good as Georgia. Georgia's just as good as Ohio State. So, all the arguing and fussing and whatever, yeah, Georgia won the game, and ultimately that's, all that matters. But Ohio State came away from this after being embarrassed by Michigan in a much better light, I feel. And, is that a loser's perspective to look at things that way? I guess so. I've been around this program and this sport for so many years. And in my time, Ohio State's won the national championship twice, 2002, which the 20th anniversary of that was just yesterday, where they beat Miami on January the 3rd, 2002. Much happier times, obviously, to pull off that Herculean upset. And they were an 11-point underdog in that game and won that game out in Phoenix. They were a 6.5-point underdog in this game, led for a good portion of the game and didn't win it. So, things end up the way that they end up. You started this off by, how could the fourth quarter have gone differently? I have asked, when the game was over, I filed my story. That took me about 5 minutes. And I walked from the photo bunker to the interview room, and I saw Matt Garvey, who is the public relations director for the Peach Bowl. And I said, Matt, can we get a pool reporter to ask the officials why they rescinded the targeting penalty? And you have to understand the mechanics of this. The targeting penalty is called on the field. It can be called on the field, but it always has to be verified and, I don't know what the word would be, agreed to, confirmed. It has to be confirmed via replay. They have to go frame by frame and look at it and confirm that it was targeting. In this instance, they did that while Marvin Harrison was down on the ground. The officials reviewed it. I was on the field, and the stadium speakers were not very good, to where if the referee ever did come on and say, yeah, we've picked it up, it's no good. I never heard that announcement. All I ever saw was Ohio State came out and kicked the field goal on 4th down. Perhaps on television they clarified it. I don't know. I guess after the fact, Bill Lamonier was like, oh yeah, they got it right. So, I don't know what Bill was saying. Yeah, I don't know what Bill was saying in the interim. What was he saying in the 2 minutes while they were reviewing it? Did they go to commercial? What happened? I don't know. So I asked Matt, can we get a pool reporter? He goes, oh, they probably already left, the officials. They probably get them out of there pretty quickly. And so I let it go. And the next day I emailed the public relations people for the playoff. And I said, hey, can we get somebody to clarify what happened on the targeting? Be it the national supervisor of officials, whoever, the replay official was, and they basically put me in connection with the coordinator of officials for the Pac-12. And I sent this email and explained, this is what I want to find out, what was missing for that to be targeting. And he sent me a reply. We don't comment on specific plays or whatever. And I said, well, with all due respect, it should have been handled on site that night. And, with a pool reporter, and it wasn't handled, the protocol wasn't followed properly. I said, just boil this down. Tell me why it wasn't targeting. I haven't heard anything back yet. So if and when I ever do, which I'm not holding my breath that I'll ever hear anything back. But again, as you say, for some reason they rescinded that. And that was critical. I mean, yeah, it knocked Marvin Harrison out of the game. But had they called the targeting and stuck with it, it's first to goal at the 2-yard line. And they're going to punch that into the end zone, you would think, and go ahead by 18 points at the start of the fourth quarter. And 18 points is much more difficult to overcome than 14 was. So, Ohio State had opportunities, didn't take full advantage of them. Obviously, at the end, as we said, there was plenty of time left when CJ Stroud got them the first down at the 30-yard line. I would have liked, they ran down Hayden on the very next play for a loss of a yard, probably just thinking, we'll get 3 or 4 yards here, get a little closer, get the clock running, that way Georgia doesn't get one last shot with the ball. And I would have really liked, they then threw 2 passes that were not completed after that, including one where he had to scramble and throw it away to avoid like a 20-yard sack, which would have basically killed it right then. The play that had killed Georgia all day long was the play fake and roll out to the wide side, and Emeka Yuka come from the short side across to the wide side, the crossing route, and hit him for a 5, 6, 7-yard gain. And now you've got a manageable 40-yard field goal, and, it's not quite as difficult on Noah Ruggles as it turned out to be. Again, can't put any of this on him. Their defense simply was not up to snuff. A slip by Lathan Ransom on the 76-yard touchdown, and the guy's gone. Again, no help over the top. When you've got them kind of backed up in their own end, why you're not, trying to keep everything underneath, I don't know. But, that's the same call, basically, that killed him against Michigan. So I don't know. It's all over. Autopsies, are what they are. The patient is still dead. So, we could probably debate it all day, but they made enough mistakes to lose the game, and that's exactly what they did.
Well, in the college football playoff and the New Year's Six games, they just really convinced me that nobody knows what targeting is, because old friend Bryson Shaw nearly decapitated somebody in the USC Tulane game, and that was called targeting on the field, only to be called not targeting in the booth, and that's a different set of officials, calling that game and everything else, different conference. So I think back to the drawing board on targeting with what it is and what it isn't. And I saw Ferris commenting in the chat about targeting no, intent to injure yes. Well, I said on social media, okay, if that's not targeting, that's still something what we saw there. That was a vicious hit. And we're supposed to be taking those types of plays out of the game, player welfare this, player welfare that. And I know you can't suddenly rewrite the rules at that point and say, well, all right, it's not targeting, but it's still something. So we're going to do something there. You can't change the engines at 35,000 feet. But intent to injure, I think that's something that's probably been around for a long time in terms of college football. When you go back to the history of college football, and players were dying, and academic types were trying to get rid of the game because it was so violent, and they came up with a better set of rules to try and have maybe a little bit of player safety even before the days of hard helmets and face masks and things of that nature. I just have a real problem with how that whole thing was put together. I was in the post-game room when Steve was trying to get the pool reporter thing done, so I kind of overheard that myself, and I was kind of nodding in agreement, but I was in the back row with the photographers. Again, not a conspiracy theory, not a second shooter from somewhere other than the grassy knoll, but I think that's going to be something that's going to be remembered, and this is going to be the Shaun Wade ejection comment that will come out of this 2022 game.